A calm day can be shattered in seconds when bears appear without warning. From a grizzly tearing through an RV park to a snowboarder trapped on a glacier, from tourists slain at a remote airport to a polar bear ambushing a sled team, danger strikes fast. Even family parties and forest picnics turn deadly. In this video, we'll explore 6 shocking true stories of bear attacks that will leave you stunned. September 7th, 2025 began like any other late summer day in Stanley, Idaho. A town surrounded by jagged mountains, pine forests, and wide valleys that drew campers and hikers from across the country. At a small RV park on the edge of the forest, families settled into their sites for a weekend of grilling, fishing, and gathering around picnic tables. The park was a picture of peace, with the sound of children laughing, the hum of camp stoves, and the smell of barbecue drifting into the trees. Among those camping was Michael Dunn, a 41-year-old father from Boise. He worked as a mechanic and spent his free time exploring the outdoors with his wife, children, and their Labrador, Scout. Michael was known by friends as dependable and devoted, someone who always put family first. The dog had been part of the family for years, a loyal companion who followed Michael everywhere. That day, Michael had set up a small grill by their RV while his children played nearby, never imagining the danger that was about to arrive. As the sun began to set, smoke from grills mixed with the scent of roasting meat. The aroma drifted deep into the surrounding forest, where it caught the attention of a grizzly bear. Drawn by the powerful smell, the massive animal pushed through the tree line, its heavy body moving swiftly across the ground. Without hesitation, it stormed into the RV park. The first sign of trouble came when the predator slammed into a picnic table. The wooden frame flipped, food containers spilled, and coolers scattered across the gravel. The beast clawed into the boxes, tearing them apart as drinks and meat splattered onto the ground. Screams erupted as families rushed to grab their children, retreating toward the safety of their vehicles. The animal showed no fear. It charged deeper into the camp, smashing through folding chairs and scattering lanterns. Its attention shifted toward one of the parked RVs where frightened children had hidden inside. With frightening power, it slammed its weight against the door. Metal groaned and hinges bent as the frame shook under repeated strikes. In the middle of the chaos, Scout lunged forward. The Labrador barked fiercely, teeth bared, throwing himself between the RV and the predator. The sudden defiance startled the animal for a moment, but then it struck. One heavy swipe of its paw sent the dog tumbling across the gravel. The sound of the impact echoed as Scout yelped in pain, his body rolling before he scrambled back up, still barking despite his injuries. Michael rushed toward his dog, trying to pull him away from danger. But as he reached out, the predator turned on him. A massive paw raked across his back, leaving deep wounds. Blood streaked across his shirt as he collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain while Scout continued to bark. The camp had turned into a battlefield of fear, with families shouting and scrambling to drive the beast back. Michael lay on the gravel, his body trembling as blood spread across his back. Scout dragged himself to his paws, limping yet still facing the predator with steady barks. The grizzly loomed above them, its fur bristling, its jaws snapping as it moved toward the injured man and the dog. Panic filled the RV park as families scrambled to protect their children. Some leaned on car horns, blasting sharp bursts that cut through the night air. Others banged pots and pans against metal, striking anything that would create noise. Headlights from several vehicles flared, beams slicing across the campsite. The sudden flood of light startled the animal, forcing it to turn its head away. Still, it did not retreat at once. Instead, it circled the area, swiping at grills and coolers, scattering what little food remained. Flames hissed out as a knocked-over stove died in the dirt. The smell of smoke and grease mixed with the metallic scent of blood, feeding the frenzy. Scout staggered but continued to bark, his voice hoarse yet unyielding. The grizzly lunged once more at the Labrador, but the barrage of horns and banging grew louder. Together, the noise and light pressed the beast back. It swung its head side to side, growling, its breath steaming in the cool mountain air. Finally, after a long moment of chaos, the massive figure turned toward the trees. With a heavy stride, it slipped back into the shadows of the forest, leaving the RV park broken and silent. For several seconds, no one moved. Then campers rushed toward Michael and Scout. The man was lifted carefully from the gravel, his back torn with deep wounds. Scout collapsed beside him, his body covered in cuts and bruises from the strike. Both were breathing, but their strength was fading. Calls for help had already been made, and soon the sound of sirens approached the quiet mountain road. Paramedics arrived and worked quickly, pressing bandages against Michael's wounds to slow the bleeding. He was lifted onto a stretcher and rushed into the waiting ambulance. Another team carried Scout, wrapping the dog gently before placing him inside a separate vehicle, bound for a local veterinarian. Families stood in clusters, their faces pale and their voices hushed as they stared at the wreckage left behind. The aftermath was clear in every corner of the campsite. RV doors were clawed and bent, grills were smashed flat, and coolers lay shredded across the ground. Blood stained the gravel where Michael had fallen, a grim reminder of how close the encounter had come to claiming lives. Though no one had died, the fear left behind was heavy. In the following days, word spread quickly through the small community of Stanley. Residents who had long lived alongside the wild were reminded of the thin barrier between safety and danger. Experts explained that the smell of food and cooking grease had drawn the predator from the forest. Warnings were issued across the region, urging campers to store food more carefully and remain alert in bear country. Michael survived after surgery and weeks of recovery, though scars stretched across his back as a permanent mark of that night. Scout endured as well, though his injuries left him slower than before. For the families who had been there, the memory of horns, headlights, and the shadow of the Grizzly tearing through camp would remain with them long after the gravel was cleaned and the doors were repaired. February 27, 2025, was a cold day on Kodiak Island, where the wind swept across the mountains and snow packed deep into the glaciers. It was the kind of harsh and silent landscape that only the most experienced outdoors people dared to enter alone. That morning, Leif Sørensen, 29 years old, prepared for a solo snowboarding descent on a remote slope far from marked trails. Born and raised in Norway, he had grown up on skis before moving to Alaska, where he worked as a seasonal guide and outdoor instructor. Known for his skill and confidence on ice and snow, Leif often tested himself on challenging routes that others avoided. His friends admired his courage, but they also worried about his habit of venturing into isolated terrain without company. That day, he had strapped a pack to his shoulders with supplies for the long trek. Inside were food, water, and safety gear, the essentials he carried whenever he set out into the backcountry. The glacier he chose was vast, cut with ridges, ledges, and deep crevasses hidden beneath a layer of powder. The air was sharp, the ground blindingly white, and the only sounds were the scrape of his board and the rush of wind. For Leif, it was freedom. He carved clean lines through the untouched snow, weaving between ridges and drops. The adrenaline of the descent was pure, but it came with the inherent risk of isolation. In these mountains, there was no one to hear a call for help, and no easy path back if trouble came. As he neared a crevasse, the peace of the moment was shattered. From the tree line at the edge of the glacier, a massive Kodiak bear emerged. Its bulk was immense, fur heavy with frost, and its dark eyes fixed on the figure sliding down the slope. Drawn by the scent of food in the pack strapped to Leif's back, the animal began to advance, each step pressing deep into the snow. Leif saw the movement too late. The bear surged forward in a sudden charge, snow spraying beneath its paws. Instinct forced him to swerve, his board cutting dangerously close to the edge of a drop. The ground beneath him crumbled slightly as he tried to hold his balance. The predator closed the distance. A powerful swipe came across his shoulder, tearing through layers of fabric and knocking him sideways. The impact sent him spinning into a snowbank, pain burning through his body. His board lodged into the drift, stopping him only feet from the edge of a sheer fall. Trapped on a narrow ledge with the glacier above and a drop below, Leif scrambled to push himself upright. The animal stalked toward him, breath steaming in the cold air, claws raking the snow as it circled the ledge. He banged his snowboard against the ice, each strike echoing across the frozen valley as he tried to drive it back. The standoff had only begun. The board clashed against the ice again and again, the sharp noise carrying across the frozen slope. The great animal paced just feet away, its heavy paws breaking through the surface with each step. Snow clung to its thick fur, and steam rose from its breath as it lowered its head toward the ledge. Every movement pressed Leif further into the narrow space, with the crevasse yawning open behind him and the cliff face towering above. The predator lunged forward, pawing at the snowbank where he stood. Ice crumbled away as claws tore deep grooves into the ledge. Leif swung the board with desperate strength, striking the air to make himself look larger. The sound echoed through the valley, but the bear held its ground, testing the narrow perch with growls that shook the still air. Each moment stretched as he fought to keep balance on the uneven surface, while pain from the strike on his shoulder spread through his arm. Minutes dragged by in frozen silence, broken only by the clash of board against ice and the scrape of claws. The bear circled in short bursts, pawing at the ledge before pulling back, as if weighing whether to leap. Each pass sent snow sliding into the crevasse, vanishing into the darkness below. Leif's legs burned with fatigue. His lungs ached from the cold, but he refused to give ground. Finally, the animal slowed. It sniffed the air, ears twitching at distant sounds beyond the glacier. With a final pawing of the snow near his boots, it turned and lumbered away. The massive shape moved across the slope, fading toward the tree line until it disappeared into the shadows. Only then did the silence return, heavy and absolute. Leif remained pressed against the icy wall, his body shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline drained away, leaving him weak and trembling. He could feel warmth spreading under his jacket where blood seeped from the gash across his shoulder. His gloves were stiff with frost, his fingers numb from gripping the board so tightly. Alone on the ledge, the weight of what had just happened settled on him. When he finally began to move, each step was slow and cautious. He freed his board from the snowbank and edged down the glacier, careful to avoid hidden crevasses. The slope that had once been a playground now felt like a trap, each shadow a reminder of the predator that had nearly ended him. Hours passed before he reached safer ground, his body stiff and bruised, his lips blue from cold. By the time he returned to the shelter, frostbite had set in on his hands and face. Doctors later treated the deep bruises and cuts, along with the frozen patches of skin that would leave lasting scars. The experience left him shaken in ways he could not forget. For Leif, the glacier no longer represented freedom. It had become a place marked by the shadow of a predator that ruled those heights. His story served as a warning across the community, a reminder of how quickly the wilderness can turn against those who enter it, unprepared for the power of what lives there. August 14, 2023, dawned clear over the remote wilderness of Sakhalin, a long island off Russia's eastern coast where forests meet rugged coastlines and wildlife moves freely through the vast land. Few traveled this far, but for 7 eco-tourists, the trip promised an unforgettable adventure. They landed on a small airstrip cut into the wilderness, surrounded by trees and open sky. The tiny terminal stood silent against the backdrop of endless green. It was here, among scattered luggage and supplies, that their journey took a horrifying turn. Among the group was Mikhail Petrov, a 41-year-old from Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk. He worked as an engineer but lived for the outdoors, spending weekends hiking, fishing, and exploring remote trails with his partner. Known for his calm nature and physical strength, Mikhail was someone others leaned on in times of stress. His partner, Svetlana Orlova, 35, shared his love of travel. She worked as a teacher, admired for her kind spirit and sense of adventure, and she often joined him on long trips. Together, they dreamed of visiting distant places, and this ecotourism journey was meant to be a highlight of their summer. The group unloaded their bags from the small aircraft, stacking crates, coolers, and backpacks on a cart. The sound of wheels rolling over gravel echoed across the otherwise quiet airfield. Staff moved quickly, organizing supplies, while the tourists stretched their legs after the flight. Spirits were high, the mood relaxed, and no one sensed danger moving silently beyond the tree line. From the shadow of the forest, a massive Russian grizzly had caught the scent of food packed tightly into the coolers. Its nose led it closer until, without hesitation, it broke cover. The ground shook as the predator surged forward, its heavy frame pounding across the gravel. The sudden attack shattered the calm, sending screams through the airstrip. The beast struck the baggage cart first. Wood splintered and metal clanged as the cart toppled, spilling crates and bags across the ground, supplies scattered in all directions, the contents bursting open under the weight of the blow. Mikhail rushed forward instinctively, trying to shield his partner from the chaos. In the rush, a crate fell against him, pinning him to the ground. The predator lunged, claws flashing as it closed in on the fallen man. The force of the strike tore through fabric and flesh, and Mikhail could not escape. His body lay beneath the crate as the predator mauled him with unrelenting strength. Svetlana stumbled backward in terror. Her foot caught on loose gravel, causing her to fall to the ground with a hard thud. The predator turned, striking at her with claws that ripped through her clothing and cut deep across her torso. Blood marked the gravel as she struggled to move, the predator's shadow looming over her. The rest of the group scattered in panic. 3 were slashed as they fled, claws tearing into arms and legs, leaving them injured but alive. Others dashed behind vehicles and metal poles, desperate for cover as the airstrip turned into a scene of chaos. The airstrip rang with screams as the animal continued its assault. Staff grabbed long metal poles, slamming them against the ground, and shouting in desperation to draw its attention away from the injured. The sound echoed across the gravel, sharp clangs cutting through the chaos. The predator lunged at whatever moved, swiping at crates and tearing through scattered backpacks. A cooler cracked open under its weight, spilling food across the ground, which only fueled its frenzy. Those who had scrambled for cover crouched behind the small terminal building and parked vehicles, watching as the bear tore through supplies. The 3 tourists who had been slashed dragged themselves towards safety, blood marking their paths across the gravel. Their cries mixed with the pounding of the predator's paws as it lunged repeatedly, crashing into objects and overturning tables stacked with equipment. Svetlana lay motionless near the torn baggage, her body marked by deep wounds. Mikhail remained pinned beneath the crate where the first attack had struck, his frame broken under the weight and the assault. Around them, the wreckage grew, the ground littered with broken wood, shredded fabric, and blood. Every second felt stretched into eternity as the animal tested its dominance over the human intrusion. The staff's noise slowly began to work. The predator hesitated, its ears twitching at the metallic clanging and shouts that filled the air. It turned in circles, frustrated by the resistance, before swiping one last time at the remains of the overturned cart. Then, with a final growl, it backed away toward the tree line. For a tense moment it stood at the edge of the forest, its massive frame still visible against the clearing. Then it slipped into the shadows and was gone. Silence fell heavy over the airstrip. Only the moans of the injured broke the stillness. The survivors emerged slowly from their hiding places, their faces pale and their bodies shaking. They moved cautiously, scanning the trees for any sign of the beast's return. When it was clear the threat had passed, attention turned to the wounded. The staff rushed to Svetlana, but her injuries were too severe. Mikhail was already beyond help, his body lying broken beneath the splintered crate. The 3 others who had been struck were still alive, though bleeding heavily. Makeshift bandages were tied from torn clothing, and pressure was applied to slow the loss of blood. Calls for help had already gone out through the radio, and soon the distant thrum of engines signaled the approach of rescue teams. Paramedics arrived swiftly, carrying stretchers and medical kits across the gravel. The wounded were stabilized and loaded into vehicles bound for the nearest hospital. The survivors stood in shock, their clothing torn, their hands stained with blood. Their luggage lay in ruins, shredded by claws and scattered across the ground, a grim reminder of how quickly a peaceful trip had turned into disaster. News of the attack spread rapidly beyond the wilderness airstrip. Experts explained that the scent of food had likely drawn the predator, a stark warning for those traveling in bear country. The incident left 2 dead and 3 severely injured. Their lives changed forever in a matter of minutes. The scars left on the group and on the airstrip itself would not fade quickly. For the survivors, the memory of that day would remain a constant reminder of the power and unpredictability of the wild. March 22, 2023, unfolded cold and gray across the wide tundra of Svalbard, where the frozen sea met endless snowfields. The air was sharp, the wind heavy, and visibility stretched only a short distance through the haze. On this harsh day, a dog sled team made its way across the ice under the guidance of 34-year-old musher Ingrid Halvorsen. Born in Tromsø, she had dedicated her life to Arctic guiding, with years of experience handling sled dogs and leading visitors through extreme conditions. Her reputation was built on skill, discipline, and a calm presence even in the most dangerous environments. For her, the silence of the North was not only a workplace but a home. The group she led consisted of 5 tourists, each eager for the thrill of crossing the Arctic wilderness. They trusted her expertise as their sleds glided over frozen ground, pulled by a team of powerful dogs trained for the biting cold. Supplies, flares, and survival gear were stacked into the sleds, every piece of equipment essential in the unforgiving landscape. Despite the harsh winds, the journey began with excitement, the rhythmic steps of the dogs breaking through the silence of the white plain. The trail that morning was lonely and exposed. No shelter, no forest, only open snow stretching for miles. Yet unseen beyond a drifted bank, danger waited. A massive polar bear had caught the scent of dogs and food, following quietly across the ice. The predator, perfectly adapted to the Arctic, moved through the storm with deadly silence until the moment came to strike. Without warning, the white shadow lunged from behind the snowbank. Its size was immense, shoulders hunched, jaws wide, and its weight crashing onto the ice. The bear charged directly at the sleds, and the peace of the journey was shattered. Dogs barked wildly as lines tangled, sleds veering sharply to the side. 2 of them toppled, spilling passengers and gear across the frozen surface. Crates slid across the ice, their food supplies bursting open as the wind carried the wrappings away. The tourists clung to what they could, their screams carried away by the storm. The predator swiped its paw through the chaos, claws tearing across a barking dog. The animal was struck hard but managed to pull away, injured yet alive. Ingrid reacted with the speed of experience. She cracked her whip through the air, the sharp sound snapping across the tundra. Her goal was to create distance, to keep the predator from pressing closer. The massive bear lowered its head, circling and testing, while its attention shifted between the injured dog, the scattered sleds, and the humans caught in disarray. The sled team was no longer moving forward. Instead, the travelers huddled together, gripping their sled frames, frozen between fear and the bitter wind. The predator pawed at supplies, tossing packs aside, its dominance over the flat ice clear. In the frozen emptiness, every second was stretched, and survival now depended on whether they could hold their ground against the king of the north. The predator's heavy steps pressed deeper into the snow as it circled the scattered sleds. Its breath steamed in the icy air while its paws left deep holes in the white crust. The dogs strained against their harnesses, barking frantically. Some pulled back while others lunged forward in confusion. The tourists clung to the sled frames, their eyes wide with fear as the towering animal tested the ground between them. Every movement of the beast felt like it could end the fragile barrier holding it back. Ingrid acted quickly. She knew hesitation would cost lives. With one hand gripping the whip, she signaled to a tourist to hand her a flare. The tube sparked to life, the red glow cutting through the gray storm. Smoke and sparks hissed into the wind, drawing the predator's attention. It paused, lowering its head, its eyes fixed on the burning light. Ingrid swung the flare high, sending a bright trail across the frozen plain. The sudden fire startled the animal, but it did not leave. Instead, it pawed the ground and lunged again, knocking another sled sideways and spilling gear. The group worked together with the tools they had. Metal poles were slammed into the ice, ringing sharply against the hard surface. Each strike added to the noise, forcing the predator to slow. The injured dog staggered behind the sleds, its side marked by deep scratches but still alive, still barking despite its pain. The rest of the team pressed closer to Ingrid, their combined strength providing the group with a thin line of defense against the threat. The standoff stretched on. Snow swirled through the air as the animal circled, looking for a weak point. Flares hissed, smoke drifted, and the harsh clanging of poles echoed again and again. The predator swiped at a scattered pack, tearing it apart, before turning back toward the huddled group. For a tense moment, it stepped closer, massive shoulders rolling, jaws snapping in the cold air. However, the combined fire, noise, and resistance proved too much for them. Slowly, with visible frustration, the beast began to back away. Step by step, it retreated toward the drifted snowbank. The glow of the last flare reflected off its fur as it turned one final time, watching the humans it had nearly destroyed. Then, with a heavy stride, it vanished into the white haze, its massive body swallowed by the storm. Silence fell, broken only by the wind and the cries of the injured dog. The tourists collapsed onto the snow, exhausted and trembling. Ingrid moved among them, checking for wounds. Most had only bruises and frostbite from clinging to the sleds, though their faces showed the deep shock of what they had endured. Supplies lay scattered across the plain, some buried under drifts, others destroyed by claws. 2 sleds were badly damaged, their frames split and runners broken. The group gathered what they could, salvaging food and equipment before reattaching the surviving dogs. The injured animal was bandaged with strips of fabric and placed carefully into a sled for the journey back. Their pace was slow, every movement watched with fear that the predator might return. Hours later, when they finally reached safety, news of the ambush spread quickly across Svalbard. The ordeal left scars both visible and unseen. The tourists suffered bruises and burns from frostbite, but the memory of the white figure emerging from the snowbank weighed heavily than their wounds. Ingrid herself, experienced as she was, admitted it was among the most dangerous moments of her career. The incident became a warning to others who traveled across the frozen plains. It proved that even under the guidance of skilled experts, the Arctic could turn deadly in an instant, its predators hidden within the very snow itself. June 21, 2022 was a warm summer day in rural Vermont, where green hills rolled beneath a bright sky and the scent of fresh grass filled the air. At a secluded farmhouse, the Carter family prepared for a small birthday celebration in their garden. Tables were set beneath the shade of a wide maple tree, decorated with bright cloths and dishes of fruit. A grill smoked near the edge of the yard, sending the smell of sizzling meat drifting across the property. Children ran across the grass while adults arranged food and drinks, enjoying the peace of their countryside home. John Carter, 38, had lived in the farmhouse for years with his wife and children. He worked as a carpenter in town and loved the slower pace of life in Vermont's wooded valleys. Family gatherings were important to him, and this event was meant to celebrate his sister's young daughter. Relatives had traveled from nearby towns, bringing cakes, coolers, and gifts to mark the occasion. The day began with laughter and chatter, the kind of quiet joy that made summer gatherings memorable. The farmhouse stood on the edge of a thick forest. Tall trees lined the property, their shadows stretching across the grass. For generations, the family had lived in proximity to wildlife, from deer crossing the fields to smaller animals wandering nearby at night. Yet none of them expected that the scent of barbecue drifting into the forest would draw a predator directly into their celebration. As the guests sat down to eat, a large black bear suddenly appeared between the trees. Its dark figure moved swiftly, breaking through the quiet edge of the forest. Drawn by the smell of grilled meat and fresh fruit, it charged into the open yard. In seconds, the cheerful atmosphere dissolved into panic. Guests screamed as chairs toppled over and dishes crashed to the ground. Drinks spilled across the grass and plates clattered as people stumbled away from the tables. The predator barreled toward the spread of food. Its heavy body knocked over a row of chairs, sending them tumbling across the yard. A cake slid off a table and smashed against the ground, frosting scattering across the grass. Picnic baskets tipped, and coolers burst open as the predator pawed through them with powerful claws. Utensils scattered, clinking across the stone patio. John reacted with desperate instinct. Grabbing a patio umbrella from the corner of the yard, he swung it frantically, trying to distract the animal. His movements caught the predator's attention, and it circled back, sniffing the ground near the spilled food. Meanwhile, children and adults scrambled toward the farmhouse. In the rush, John's niece slipped on a patch of scattered cake, sliding across the floor of the patio before pulling herself up to dash inside. The predator swiped at fallen plates and overturned baskets, towering over the yard as the family huddled in fear. For several long minutes, the birthday celebration devolved into a chaotic scene, the sounds of scraping claws and clattering metal filling the Vermont countryside. The animal continued to prowl through the garden, its head lowered as it sniffed at every trace of food left on the grass. Its weight pressed chairs flat into the ground, while claws raked across the wooden legs of a picnic table. The barbecue still smoked nearby, and the bear shoved its snout toward the grill, scattering hot coals and sending sparks across the stone patio. The sharp hiss of fire against damp grass rose into the air, adding another layer of fear to the chaos. Guests who had not made it inside crouched behind the farmhouse walls or ducked behind trees at the edge of the yard. Their eyes followed the predator's movements, each second stretching longer than the last. Inside the house, children cried, while adults pressed against the windows, watching as the yard that had been so cheerful minutes earlier became a place of danger. John held his ground with the umbrella, though his arms ached from swinging it. He stepped back toward the farmhouse wall, bruised and shaking, but determined to give the others more time. The bear pawed at the umbrella once, knocking it aside, before losing interest and turning again to the scattered food. A bowl of fruit was crushed under its paw, berries and slices of melon smeared into the grass. A cooler lid cracked open, spilling ice and cans across the ground, which the predator nosed through before moving on. The standoff lasted for a considerable period of time. The only sounds were the panting of the dogs barking from inside the house, the sobs of the children, and the scrape of claws across metal and wood. Eventually, with its hunger partly satisfied, the bear began to lose interest. It circled the yard one last time, sniffing near the patio where frosting still covered the stone. Then, heavy paws carried it back toward the tree line. With a final glance over its shoulder, the predator disappeared into the forest, leaving only silence and wreckage behind. Guests began to emerge cautiously, their bodies trembling from the release of fear. Chairs lay broken, the tablecloth was shredded, and pieces of food were scattered across the garden. The once festive yard looked more like the aftermath of a storm. Several people bore scratches and bruises from falling in the panic, and one guest nursed a swollen arm after being struck by a falling chair. No serious injuries had occurred, but the shock was visible on every face. The dog in the house barked relentlessly, its instincts still warning of danger. John sank to the grass, his shirt marked with dirt and sweat, his body aching after the frantic defense. As night fell, the family gathered inside the farmhouse, unable to enjoy the birthday meal that had been prepared for them. They spoke quietly, reflecting on how quickly the day had changed. Word of the encounter spread through the small community, a reminder to everyone in the area that living in the countryside meant sharing space with wild animals. The memory of the black bear's sudden intrusion would remain with the Carter family long after the wreckage was cleared. The damaged furniture could be replaced and the spilled food forgotten, but the fear that gripped the guests in those tense minutes left its own lasting mark. The celebration had been ruined, yet they were grateful that no one had lost their life. It stood as a sharp lesson of how fragile safety could be when the wilderness pressed too close. August 14th, 2025, was a bright summer morning in Wyoming's National Forest, where tall trees stood over quiet trails and the air smelled of pine and dust. Families often drove into these secluded areas to hike, camp, or enjoy picnics in the stillness of nature. On that day, the Peterson family arrived at a remote parking spot with plans for a simple outdoor meal. For them, these trips were a tradition, a way to step away from busy schedules and share time under open skies. Laura Peterson, 38, worked as a school teacher, known for her love of the outdoors and habit of organizing small adventures with her children. Her husband, James, 40, balanced long hours as an engineer with weekends spent fishing, hiking, and camping. Their children, Ellie, 9, and Max, 7, were energetic and curious, always excited for any chance to explore new trails or climb rocks while their parents unpacked food. That morning, the family carried coolers, picnic boxes, and blankets from the car, eager to enjoy a peaceful day surrounded by the forest. The clearing seemed calm, with only the wind stirring through branches and the hum of insects nearby. Yet the very scent of the food they carried drifted into the thick brush that bordered the parking area. Hidden in the shade, a massive grizzly moved closer, drawn by the strong smell of meat, fruit, and snacks. The predator advanced silently, its paws pressing into the ground without sound until the moment came to strike. The sudden charge shattered the stillness. The grizzly burst from the brush with explosive force, covering the distance in seconds. Laura had just set down a cooler when the animal slammed into her, knocking her hard onto the ground. She hit the dirt with a cry as claws raked across her arm. James rushed forward to push the beast back, but the swipe of a paw cut across his shoulder, tearing through fabric and leaving him stumbling in pain. Ellie and Max screamed and ran behind the car, crouching low against the doors as the attack unfolded. Their small bodies shook as they pressed themselves flat, hiding from the towering shape that now loomed over their picnic. The bear reared, swiping at the stacked boxes, sending sandwiches, fruit, and utensils scattering across the gravel. Bags split open, spilling out food, the scent thickening the frenzy. Laura scrambled to her knees, her face pale, while James pressed a hand to his wounded shoulder. The car stood as their only shield, but the predator circled, sniffing at the fallen food and pawing at the ground. The family's peaceful picnic had turned into a desperate fight for survival in the span of moments. The predator dug through the scattered food, its head lowering as it sniffed at the broken boxes. Crumbs, fruit, and wrappers clung to its wet nose as it clawed at the cooler, dragging it several feet before tipping it onto its side. Drinks spilled into the dirt, mixing with the dust, while utensils clattered under its heavy steps. The children remained pressed behind the car, their small hands gripping the metal as they listened to the sounds of tearing and crashing only feet away. Laura pulled herself upright, her body shaking as she braced against the vehicle. James stood close to her, clutching his injured shoulder. Both of them knew they had to distract the animal before it pressed closer to where Ellie and Max were hiding. With little choice, they began striking their fists against the hood of the car, the metallic echoes bouncing across the lot. The sharp noise startled the predator for a moment, causing its head to snap up from the pile of food. The grizzly growled, circling toward the source of the sound. Its paws dragged across the car, claws leaving deep scratches in the paint as it pressed its weight against the metal. The children whimpered, but the banging and shouts from their parents kept the predator from climbing onto the vehicle. The racket grew louder as they continued, each strike echoing through the trees. For long minutes, the standoff raged on, the predator testing its ground while the family fought to appear larger and stronger. Finally, the constant noise and motion drove the animal back. Its ears twitched, its head swung side to side, and slowly it backed away from the car. It lingered near the edge of the brush, glancing back at the scattered food still covering the ground. With one last shake of its massive head, it turned and retreated into the forest, its heavy body fading into the green shadows. Silence followed, broken only by the gasps of breath and the distant calls of birds. The parking area, once prepared for a quiet picnic, was left in ruin. Food was shredded, boxes torn apart, and gear scattered across the gravel. Deep claw marks scarred the car, and the cooler lay split open in the dirt. All 4 members of the Peterson family bore wounds, cuts, and bruises from the frantic defense. James's shoulder bled from the deep gash, while Laura's arm carried claw marks that would leave lasting scars. The children were shaken but alive, their small bodies covered in scrapes from diving for cover. When help finally arrived, the scene told the full story of how quickly a calm afternoon had turned into chaos. The aftermath left the family forever changed. The picnic was ruined, but the lesson was clear. In bear country, even a simple meal could draw danger without warning. Though they survived, the Petersons would carry the memory of that day as a reminder of the fragile line between peace and peril in the wilderness.